Okay, so this is my evaluation for the Foundation Portfolio for Media. This refers to my short film The Quiet, and I'm going to be talking about the actual marking points that would be used for A2. So the first point is shooting material appropriate to the task set. The task that we were assigned was to create an opening to a thriller sequence. Due to this, I feel that we successfully created a narrative that conformed to the traits typical for this genre. For example, the inside location was selected for its Gothic-style church window, and by doing so, the audience can notice that this scene that they're about to view will be negative or dark, which is something typical for the thriller genre. Similarly, the woods were also a perfect location for the rest of the sequence because there is an automatic assumption by the audience that the woods will be a disruptive place, which is further supported by the fact that the visuals are accompanied by a disruptive filter that was added in post-production. Alternatively, we may have not been successful in achieving the same because, unlike the woods, the inside location has no immediate negative connotations, which is untypical for a thriller sequence. Due to such, the audience doesn't automatically assume that something isn't right, and therefore a less effective thriller is actually created. As well as this, we did not cast or include a direct threat, be it an obvious character or animal, that would show the audience that the character has a legitimate reason to fear being in the woods. Although it is good to leave the audience to suspect as to what would happen, it does somewhat undermine the creative process, so it is clear that we didn't shoot as much appropriate material as we could have done. Okay, so the next point is the controlled use of camera. I feel that it is clear that we were successful in using the equipment to the best of our ability. The majority of the shoot was recorded with a camera on a tripod, like I'm recording at the moment, or we used a steady cam when it was appropriate, so there was a slight job, but for the majority it was controlled. This is then effective because the variation of the two camera techniques allows for clear juxtaposition between the two locations, one slightly jolty, one completely still, in which one provides stability in the whole, and the use of handhelds and steadicams in the woods allows for a sense of disruption, which is what we'd probably try to aim for. And this is actually quite normal in the thriller industry because it's been shown in films like Total Recall. However, from the shots in the woods, we chose to film with a Steadicam rather than a tripod due to the fact that it was raining very heavily beforehand. In doing so, there was a shake in the visuals, and although this is successful in many aspects of thriller films because it shows clear disruption, the overall impression that the audience receives is that this was done sloppily. It was recorded to a lower ability. As a result, there was a lack of control of camera, albeit minimal. It would be unacceptable if unintentional in the film industry. Okay, so the next point that we were marked on was attention to framing. The framing on the whole was successful because the majority of the shots convey the idea that the female character is the protagonist of the sequence and storyline. This is shown by the fact that she's placed at the centre of many frames in our shots, and if this was not the case, she would still be the focus, as everything else would not be eye-catching to the audience. As this is the main idea that we are trying to convey to the audience, we're successful in our narrative aims because the storyline has a clear protagonist, which is reinforced by the positioning of the character. Despite this, due to the fact that the main character is nearly in every shot, there is little variation and it does become boring for an audience. Especially in a situation if the sequence is trying to create tension. If we position the character in a situation with like a high angle shot, for example, so that more of the environment was explored, where she is in relation to the other character, tension may be further created because it allows for dramatic irony if it is very obvious that the other character is there, but the main character doesn't see it. The next point that I get marked on was the variety of shots. In many ways we were successful in this sense because it's clear that we used many variation of shot sizes. This is useful in a thriller sequence because it allows for an interesting and engaging sequence, which is useful when you're trying to convince an audience to watch the rest of the film, which is the whole point of an opening. For example, when you're presenting establishing shots to the audience, we would use long shots with a wide depth of fill in order to convey lots of information to the audience. It is in these little details, such as these, which makes our actions more effective because it then either withholds information to make the narrative more interesting, or it literally gives the information to the character to further contribute to this idea of dramatic irony. However, the majority of the sequence relied heavily on close-up or mid-shots of the character from her front. Although this is effective to show her expressions in relation to the development of the plot, it is ineffective because the odd variation could have been more interesting and more engaging for the audience. On the other hand, it may have been more effective to confuse the audience with different variation of shots, because it would then lead them to question what they've seen, meaning that they would feel more inclined to watch the end of the sequence, so then they can finally understand what happened. Regardless, if we did either, it would have improved the sequence. The next point that we marked on was close attention to mise-en-scène. I feel that we had a clear focus on mise-en-scène during our development stage, was because we literally designed the character's hair, makeup and costume down to the very last detail. For example, for the indoor shoot, we decided to curl the actor's hair and use a gold eyeliner, which would be useful because we didn't need to worry about the naturalism of it because the black and white filter would have been applied in post-production. Also, we successfully changed the lighting on shoot and via post-production techniques, so we controlled a lot of what the audience would be seeing and how they would interpret it subconsciously. In doing so, we have successfully created a film which the mise-en-scène details are perfect. Despite this, when it came to planning and shooting our final products, there were inconsistencies that occurred from things that were out of control. For example, we planned for the female character to have long hair, which would be more easily curlable, but due to lack of communication with the actress, she actually cut her hair shorter, so we still managed to curl her hair because she had a fringe, but it didn't look as effective. Also, the filming of the indoor location had to be rushed due to time management issues on the actor's part, so the quality of the footage may have been worsened due to this fact. Therefore, I feel that what we actually recorded could have been improved. The next point is editing so that meaning is apparent to the viewer. Our editing was successful because it allowed for us to create tension, a convention which is regularly explored in the thriller genre, as shown by Total Recall. For example, the use of shot-reverse shots between POV shots of the female character from the other character's perspective was useful because it gives the audience the impression that there is another character in the scene, although this isn't directly explored. In doing so, it further creates dramatic irony, and due to such, the audience assumes that only danger can come from what is about to happen in the sequence. On the other hand, the editing was not obviously able to convey the message that she was being followed. Instead, the idea was only hinted at, and it isn't immediately obvious that this is the case. This isn't useful because those in the audience may be less able to comprehend the narrative, which isn't useful for the director. Therefore, more uses of editing could have made this idea incredibly clear to the audience, and in doing so, the overall storyline would become more impactful. The next point where we got marked on was making selective and appropriate use of shot transitions, captions, and other effects. I feel that we used captions effectively in the sequence because it allowed for us to give the audience exposition in a very fluid and effective way. For example, this was shown clearly when the wood scenes is first introduced to the audience, where it says 3 days earlier, and it's clearly shown when giving the production company info at the beginning of the sequence. In terms of transitions, however, on the whole we use cuts, which were useful because it creates a flowing sequence, which is useful for a thriller sequence, especially when the rate of cuts is increased to increase the tension within the scene. Alternatively, the use of captions may briefly disrupt the sequence, especially when the aim is to build tension. Despite the fact that this doesn't really happen for long, to some members of the audience it may distract them, which isn't needed when you're trying to get them to focus on the narrative. Also, more varied use of transitions would look more effective for an audience because although cuts were useful when trying to increase the pace of the sequence, a fade out from the final shot would have been just as effective because it would have indicated that the introduction is over, and it prepares them for the potential exposition that they would receive afterwards in the main body of the narrative. The final point that we marked on was recorded and editing sounds with images appropriately. I feel that the Foleys that we chose to accompany the visuals on screen were useful because they conform to the typical noises that would be found in a thriller sequence. For example, the footsteps that were diegetic and recorded on site at the wood scene were matched effectively with the images because they don't look out of place and they are in time. We didn't really have an excuse not to do this because it was incredibly easy to record the visuals from the camera directly just using its inbuilt microphone. This is also the case with the non-diegetic backing track because we edited it to allow for a dramatic pause when the title sequence was shown, allowing for more impact on the actual audience. Despite this, we used the same ambient soundtrack for the wood scene on the loop. This is ineffective because the lack of variation means that the soundtrack will become repetitive, and in doing so the audience may become bored or confused. Although this isn't the main focus, we could have easily recorded some soundtrack using the equipment that we had at the shoot in order to avoid the problem, just like we did with the footsteps, because it would have taken very little time to do so. Overall, I feel that what we learned from our AS portfolio piece was useful, because it means that we can learn from our mistakes in both planning and production, because it means that our final A2 piece will be incredibly effective with what we've learned.